On the prequel to the 30th episode, we're still learning to grow up with Harry Potter and previewing The Goblet of Fire. Hello and welcome back to the prequel to the 30th episode of This Film is Lit. We're back on the good mics. Should be mostly from here on out, but we'll see. Like I said in the little entry roll, pre-roll, whatever I want to call it, cold open, we're learning things with This Film is Lit. We're kind of continuing our trend of growing up because the books continue that trend. Mm-hmm. So we're going to expand on that and keep going with that. And then we're going to preview Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So let's get into learning things with This Film is Lit.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Yeah, this is, it's continuing what we talked about on the prequel, The Prisoner of Azkaban, because the movies really start to grow up with number 3. And the books do a little bit, but it really, really sets in with book 4. So I could talk at length, I think.
Yeah.
About how Goblet of Fire starts exploring darker themes and ideas in a deeper, more consequential way than the first 3 books. Yes, even book 3. But I feel like we already kind of discussed that aspect of the stories in the Prisoner of Azkaban prequel. Yeah. And really what the big difference between 3 and 4 is in that aspect is that Rowling effectively retcons a lot of the dark stuff in book 3 with the time turner.
Yeah, like Buckbeak dying and Sirius potentially being having his soul sucked out.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen in book 4.
No,
right?
No retconning.
Cedric stays dead. What? Stop bringing up the first child. Stop it.
Okay. I know.
I didn't read that and I don't want to.
It's a nightmare. Don't read it. But anyways, it's just funny to point out that you say that because...
that's like the whole point of it, isn't it? Like that's the main thing that they're trying to do.
Harry's, again, I don't remember a lot of it because I tried to black it out immediately. But from what I remember, Harry's son, whatever his dumb name is.
Albus Severus.
Albus Severus.
God.
Decides because he's living in the shadow of his father, the thing he's going to do to prove that he's just as good, if not better than his father, is save the person that Harry couldn't, which is Cedric Diggory. I think ultimately he ends up not saving him, but he spends the whole book trying to, I think. I can't remember. Like I said, I don't...
But, like, why Cedric? Because a lot of other people died. Like, save Dobby.
Yeah, but Cedric was like...
Lupin.
Part of it is... Yeah, lots of people. But part of it is because Amos shows up in the book and is very, like, not guilt-stricken. It's very, like, angry about and, like, upset still... at this point about the fact that Cedric died and basically because of Harry is the not that it's Harry's fault, but that it is as a result of Harry existing that Cedric died, basically.
Okay. All right.
So he's very resentful and sort of again, if I'm remembering any of this incorrectly, don't blame me because I don't want to remember it. So let's
all right. So that was our review of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about it someday, but not now. Let's go. Continue.
All right. So instead of rehashing the kind of increased darkness of the books in book 4, I want to talk about some key differences between children's literature and adult/young adult literature, and how Rowling uses those differences to shift her story out of the children's section effectively.
Yeah.
So children's book series tend to not be inextricably interconnected. Yeah. Oftentimes, you can pick up any book in a series, read it on its own, and still understand what's going on and enjoy the book. For example, Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
They can be read out of order, and you can still understand them and enjoy them.
Yeah.
And in fact, most people start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and if you put them in chronological order, as they are often sold, that's actually book 2.
When you say chronological, do you mean as they were written or as they take place?
As they take place.
Okay,
because Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the first
book.
written.
Right.
But if you put the whole series in the order that they take place within the story, it's book 2.
Gotcha. Okay.
A lot of children's series are also syndicated. The Magic Tree House.
I love that series.
The Babysitter's Club, the Boxcar Children. The events in those series technically occur in a certain order, but the books can be read in any order.
Yeah.
You don't have to start with Christie's big idea in order to understand The Ghost at Dawn's House.
Yeah, and just to play on this a little bit, this is also a bigger thing in older television. I think this is just, it's sort of changed. I think it's a thing in adult fiction, obviously, is more serialized.
Yeah.
But it's also a trend with the times to some extent, because a lot of older television was episodic.
Yes.
Where you could watch any, like most of the Star Trek television. It's one of my go-tos for this example. There are things throughout the series that go from point A to point B, but it's very loose and it's more of character stuff. And there are plot elements. But
I almost brought that up because I saw the difference there in like sitcoms and dramas. Sitcoms tend to be more episodic. Like you can watch an episode of a sitcom out of continuity.
You can, yes.
And more so and still enjoy it. Like you might not know what's going on 100% of the time, but it's still enjoyable. It's still watchable. Whereas with a drama, you can't really do that as much.
And I think it's also more just I think I could be wrong about this, but I really do feel like, and it seems to me, and again, this is anecdotal, but it feels to me like it is also a product of when those things were written. Like if you compare a sitcom from the 90s to a sitcom from today, Parks and Rec is a sitcom and Seinfeld is a sitcom. Seinfeld episodes are much more independent and episodic than Parks and Rec is. There are much stronger through lines and character arcs and like season long story arcs in Parks and Rec than there are in Seinfeld.
True.
And so I'm sure there are examples in across the timeline of sitcoms back in the day that had more arcing storylines and ones currently that don't. But to me, it feels a bit more like we're slowly progressing more and more and more towards, or we have been progressing more and more towards, and audiences seem to enjoy more serialized stories where you tell a continuous story over the course of episodes, even if it is slightly episodic at the same time, like a Parks and Rec, where again you can watch any episode.
And maybe that has to do with like the rise of the dramedy. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it has to do with that. I also think it probably has a lot to do with, to some extent, maybe binge watching is part of it to some extent, and streaming. Whereas with TV, when you didn't have on demand, let me watch these episodes in order. If you weren't watching it the night it came out, you probably were catching random episodes to some extent in syndication. Right. I would imagine that might have something to do with it. Whereas now, since it's on demand, since you can watch it in order, it makes more sense for writers to tell a story in order, maybe. Or you know what I mean? I don't know. It's a guess. But anyways, I just think that's another element of what you're saying. But I think it is a very important that, children's books, that is definitely...
Right, children's books tend to be more episodic than any other age range of literature. And the factors that make that type of storytelling possible include formative recaps at the beginning of each book.
Yep, which Harry Potter is guilty.
Yes, reintroductions of characters, sometimes even well-known primary characters.
Which Harry Potter
and insular storylines that are completely resolved by the last page, aka not introducing new information near the end of the book.
No new things. It's just we wrap it up.
So young adult and adult book series tend to not be written this way. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions to the rule, but they tend to not be written this way. You try picking up Return of the King without having read Fellowship or Two Towers. Yeah. Or better yet, maybe try reading A Clash of Kings without having read A Game of Thrones. Yeah. See how that goes for you.
It's going to be rough.
Unlike children's literature, adult and YA lit utilizes elements like cliffhangers and open-ended meandering plots They typically don't recap at the beginning of each book or reintroduce characters, and if they do, it's usually a bare minimum recap, like just enough to allow readers to reorient themselves in the world. But typically, adult and YA trust their readers to remember the characters and to remember the plot.
Because your brain is more formed and you can remember things.
So all of this to say, the first 3 Harry Potter books can be read more or less on their own without much detriment to understanding or enjoyment. They feature recaps, they feature reintroductions of characters.
Which is something we talked about in all of our episodes so far that I forgot was a part of the books. Probably because when I was rereading them every year, I was a dumb little kid. Or not a little, I was 11 or whatever, 12.
Right.
And so it didn't stick out to me as much because it helped me when I was
being it helped you and you were used to it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of children's literature does that.
Yeah.
And they also featured insular storylines.
Yeah.
And I want to take a minute to pause here and define insular. I'm probably saying it wrong.
I always said it or pronounced it insular.
Insular?
But I either way seems reasonable.
Insular. Because I think that's probably the most important element here. So when I say insular, I mean something along the lines of contained or enclosed.
I assume it shares a similar root, Latin/Greek root with inside.
I don't know about inside, but nerd alert. It comes from the same Latin root as island.
Oh.
No man is an island, but some books can be.
What an epic line. I would imagine all of those share a similar, because inside, contained within, all of that.
Probably. But that starts to change with Goblet of Fire. It does feature a recap. It's also the first book in the series to not begin with that recap. The first chapter doesn't feature Harry at all, which is another departure from what we've become accustomed to. And we don't get that recap until around page 20. Now compare that to books 2 and 3, whose recaps begin on page 3 and page 1, respectively.
Yeah. The thing I noticed as I'm rereading 4, and I'm about 250 pages in right now, is that even though it starts hitting recaps, the 2 and 3, their recaps are very much like, here's a paragraph or a page recapping what Hogwarts is, what wizards are, Harry's backstory, all that stuff. Whereas 4, it's like every time we hit a little plot element that needs to be, it's like a sentence or two reminding us about, like, we're talking about Quidditch, like when we get to the Quidditch World Cup, and there's like 2 sentences about, like, Quidditch is the most popular sport in the wizarding world. Yeah. And then we move on. Like, it's...
Goblet of Fire's recaps are worked in much more naturally
it feels
than the
less
first 2-3 books.
Obtrusive,
Yeah. Goblet of Fire also doesn't have an insular storyline, and it is the first book that does not have this.
3 I would counter say 3 teeters on the edge.
3 teeters on the edge of a lot of things.
But it doesn't. Yeah, it does.
But it doesn't.
Yeah.
So the main conflict of Goblet of Fire is the Triwizard Tournament, and that is resolved by the end of the book, but then Rowling does something new. She starts on a brand new conflict right before the book ends, which is the plotline of Voldemort's resurrection and eventual return.
Yeah, he's back. What's going to happen now?
Yeah. So if we compare that to book 3, the main conflict of Prisoner of Azkaban is that we're misinformed about who Sirius Black is and what he's all about. But by the end of the book, we've answered those questions, and we don't really get any new ones. Sirius has to go on the lam again, and we don't really know what's going to happen to him, but that's not much different from not knowing what's going to happen to Harry after the book ends. Yeah. And perhaps most importantly, we do hear from Sirius right before the end of the book, so we know that he and Buckbeak are at least relatively safe.
Yeah. I guess and I guess all of them apply in this sense. The reason I say it teeters is that Sirius is a very important recurring element within the next books. And now, to be fair, Chamber of Secrets, once we get to 7, also has a very important part that we weren't aware of until, you know what I mean? That we weren't aware of how important it was until we get to 6 or I guess 7 probably. But yeah, it teeters, and it's definitely not the same as 4, where we have all this brand new open, like, holy shit, Voldemort's alive, is back. What's going to happen
And
now?
to me, like, too, one of the main things that makes the storylines no longer insular is that in Goblet of Fire, they frequently discuss the happenings of Prisoner of Azkaban.
Right.
Whereas that hasn't really happened before.
No.
Like, they don't ever really discuss what happened in books 1 and 2 and 3. Which is, and that's always something that was kind of funny to me.
Yeah.
Like, you would think at some point one of them would be like, hey, remember that time we played giant death chess? That was weird, right?
Yeah, you're right.
But they don't do that. They don't ever go back to the previous adventures.
There's only ever a couple lines where, like, in 3, there's a couple times where Harry... It's not even him saying it. It's us in his head.
Yeah.
You know, the narrator, Harry, says something about... He's thinking or talking about Jenny to us, or, you know, as a narrator, and says, like, oh, she was possessed last year. Like, there's a line or something about her being... possessed by Voldemort, not possessed, but quote, whatever the right term is for it.
To the effect that it feels more like part of that recap.
Yeah.
Than any kind
it
of...
really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any kind of acknowledgement by the actual characters that, hey, this stuff happened.
No. Yeah.
But with Goblet of Fire, they actually do discuss amongst themselves...
Oh, yeah, constantly.
Things that happened in previous books.
Because, yeah, like we said, Sirius is a pivotal character in this one and 5, and then not anyone's after that, spoiler.
And Goblet of Fire ends similarly to the first 3. We have everyone on the train going back home for the summer, but instead of leaving us with this adventure is over and we will see you at the start of the next adventure, we're left with a bunch of brand new questions to consider.
Yeah.
Will anyone believe Harry's story? What's going to happen with the Daily Prophet article? When will Voldemort show up again? Etc., etc., etc. It's not an ending. It's another beginning. And in fact, because J.K. Rowling is often pretty on the nose, the last chapter of The Goblet of Fire is called The Beginning.
Bwah. When I read that, going to I was like, what?
I love her, but she is a little on the nose sometimes.
But you can do that when you're writing for kids.
Exactly.
They don't get it.
Yeah.
I never put that together. I never thought about that. I literally, because I haven't finished, I mean, like I said, I'm a quarter of the way through the book right now. And when I was reading through your notes earlier and I saw that, I was like, oh, shit. Oh, shit. But yeah, it is. Like, yeah, it's on the nose.
Kill Bill sirens went off in your head.
It was like, wah, wah. Yeah.
But also, aside from these kind of plot type elements, Goblet of Fire is also the first book in the series to feature any kind of romantic subplot beyond just thinking that somebody's cute.
Yeah.
And yeah, that does tend to be more of an adult or young adult thing than something you'd find in a children's book.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Whole puberty thing.
Yeah, that whole puberty thing that happens sometimes.
Yeah. And this is, and just to recollect, they're 14 in this book, so they're right, on the
they're right there.
Right in the smack dab in the middle of the hormones. So.
Ugh, God, you couldn't pay me to go back to 14. So to sum up, there are 3 main elements that take the Harry Potter book series from children's literature to young adult literature, which are 1, a deeper, more consequential exploration of dark themes and ideas. 2, a less repetitive, less insular story structure overall. And 3, forays into romantic subplots.
Yep.
So there you go. You learned a thing today.
You learned a thing. And we're still growing up with Harry Potter.
As we did.
As we both did. Yep. As we absolutely did.
And there was such a gap between The Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. Harry was older than me when I read The Goblet of Fire.
And
I was like 11 when this came out. And I think I had caught back up almost, I think, by the time Order of the Phoenix came out.
Yeah.
So I was just as angsty.
Just as angsty, man. And oh boy, is Order of the Phoenix Harry angsty. Which is something we'll probably talk about in the next prequel episode.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire book facts.
I'd like to make an announcement. Hogwarts Castle will not only be your home this year, but home to some very special guests as well.
Book facts. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, published July 8th of the year 2000.
Man, this first 4 came out real fast.
That's the year my little brother was born.
Yeah.
He's 18 now. Rip me.
So like the first 4 books came out like one a year?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
I know. That's
Especially
why they're so much shorter.
Well, but the 4th book is not that much shorter than the rest.
No. The 4th book is really long.
The 4th book is like the 3rd longest, second longest?
Maybe she was already working on it when...
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just saying it is crazy to me how quickly those first 4 came out.
It came out. It was the year my little brother was born, and I remember that. I mean, not just because of the date, but because my mom had to go to the hospital like in the middle of the night to have him. And I remember sitting up at my grandma's house reading this book.
Goblet of Fire. Yeah.
So in the last prequel episode, we mentioned that The Prisoner of Azkaban was the last book in the series to be published separately in the UK and the US, which means that Goblet of Fire was the first book to be released simultaneously in both countries. It was also strategically released on a Saturday, so that kids didn't have to worry about any conflict between school and buying the book.
There you go.
Which to me sounds more like parents didn't have to worry about any conflict between work and buying the book.
Yeah, that seems much more... for sure that was how it was going. 11-year-old me wasn't making my way to the bookstore to buy a $40, $30 hardback copy of Harry Potter by myself. Come book 6 or 7 I was, but book 4 I was not. I was 12 at the time, so...
The pressure to get the book out on time caused an editing mistake. A lot of people have heard this one, I think. It's a continuity error, which shows Harry's father emerging first from Voldemort's wand. However, as confirmed in The Prisoner of Azkaban, James died first. So then Harry's mother ought to have come out of the wand first. Yeah. This was corrected in later editions, but it's a fun way to check which edition you have at home. It's more fun than looking at the copyright page anyway, so...
It's true.
Here's a fun thing that I didn't know until I started doing this research. The working title for Goblet of Fire was Harry Potter and the Doomspell Tournament, which sounds like a Mad Max movie.
That's a terrible, Triwizard's a much better idea, or a much better name for... I always remember being surprised, even as a young kid, after I read it, like, why wasn't it called Harry Potter and the Triwizard Tournament? But, yeah.
Well, I can explain that, actually. Rowling said in an interview, I changed my mind twice on what the title was. The working title had got out, Harry Potter and the Doomspell Tournament. Then I changed a Doomspell to Triwizard Tournament. Then I was teetering between Goblet of Fire and Triwizard Tournament. In the end, I preferred Goblet of Fire because it's got that kind of Cup of Destiny feel about it, which is the theme of the book.
Yeah. I don't know if it's the theme of this book. I mean, it's an element of the book. Yeah. Yeah, and sort of the destiny is a theme of the series. Yeah. So
it's at least one of the themes of the book.
But I do agree that, while I did think that why wasn't it called Harry Potter and the Triwizard Tournament, I agree that Goblet of Fire is a vaguer,
it's
more vague or vaguer, more vague, enticing title.
Yes,
like
it
Goblet of Fire.
is.
What does that mean? Whereas Triwizard Tournament's like, okay, it's a tournament of like there's more information you can kind of suss out and figure out. But like Goblet of Fire just is more general or generic in a good way.
Rowling has also said that Goblet of Fire was the most difficult to write at the time. I feel like she said that about every single one. She said that
about everything. And the hilarious thing to me is that seems insane because or that seems silly because she wrote it so quickly, relatively speaking. We just discussed that these came out like one per year, almost, and then from here on out they took a lot longer, which makes me think. Well, then again, if she said that right after this book came out, then at the time it
Right.
was the hardest probably.
Right.
For her.
Well, yeah, it was the most difficult to write at the time.
Yeah,
Is
so then,
the quote that I found. Because she noticed a giant plot hole halfway through writing. No word on what that plot hole is. But in particular, she had trouble with the 9th chapter, The Dark Mark, which she supposedly rewrote lucky 13 times.
Here's the thing. I didn't know this. Literally, even because I didn't read through all your notes until just now when you said that. But as I was reading that chapter the other night, I was like, this chapter is the most... Because I remember talking to you about how, because we were discussing, kind of briefly discussing how much the movie changes, specifically from this chapter, because this is like the inciting incident.
Yeah.
The inciting incident times infinity in the sense that, like, it's like 12 inciting incident.
It gets the ball rolling on, like, everything.
That's what I mean. But there's so many characters and there's so many facets to what happens in this chapter, and it's like... It reminds me of the movie Clue, like when the lights go out, because it is kind of, they're in the dark and they're in the woods, and you know, like when the lights go out and then a million things happen, and then the rest of the book is like, let's figure out what happened in that 30 seconds while the lights were out, and then the rest of the book is Tim Curry running around yelling things like
that is a stunningly brilliant analogy,
right? Because that's what it reminded me of. It's like, because it's like, as I remembered what the plot of the book was, I'm like, this chapter is insane, and hearing the fact that she rewrote it 13 times does not surprise me at all, because it is so complicated, and there's so many elements and so many things going on.
So many moving parts.
So many moving parts that I was like, holy cow. And so that's actually really interesting hearing that she rewrote it that many times, because I would imagine you would have to write something that important to the rest of the story of the book.
Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me either that I think we've said every single time that she had said it was the most difficult to write so far, because I feel like you would feel that way as you were writing them. Yeah. So I'm interested now. I'm going to try to look for it when we get to the end to see if there's anywhere where she definitively said this one
was the hardest.
Was the hardest one to write.
Let's guess. Let's just make a prediction right now. Let's be Professor Trelawney. If I had to guess which one I thought was probably the hardest to write, I would think it was probably, it's either 4, 5, or 6. Right. I think 7's pretty not easy, but you know where once you've written all of the lead up, you're there. You're there. You're just wrapping it up. It has hard elements, but you know what you're doing. My guess would be, I wouldn't be surprised. I actually wouldn't be surprised if this was the hardest one. 4 wasn't the hardest one. For me, it was between 4 and 6.
I'm going to put my money on 5.
Yeah, I could see any 3 of them.
5's kind of a behemoth.
It is. That's the thing. It's long and there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I could see that too. I guess for me, 4 is that it's the start of the actual, like we said, it's the start. It's the
start of the actual story.
Of the story. And then 6 is the prelude to the ending. So I could see that also. You have to set up your finale, which I feel like could be difficult. But 5, I could see where you're coming from, in that 5 is, like you said, a behemoth. It's huge, and there's so many things going on, and we have so many different storylines and so many different elements, and we're bridging the beginning and the penultimate book. So I could see any, but I would bet it would be one of those 3. I'm going to bank on 4, but I think 5 is a safe guess.
I'm going to bank on 5.
Okay.
Watch us both be wrong.
Watch us not be able to find her say definitively.
I will tweet her and see if I can get her to reply to me.
We're doing a podcast. We have to know which book was hardest for you to write.
So Goblet of Fire received mostly positive reviews. Some critics pointed out that the story lagged in some places, especially near the end, when both villains stop the action to monologue for a bit. Because that does happen.
Yep. That also happens in 2, though. So.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. And arguably in 3.
Yeah.
But we've been led to believe that Sirius is the villain the
at
whole
the time
time,
where
and
we
he
think
does monologue.
Sirius
at the
monologues
end.
like a motherfucker, and we think he's the villain at the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely
All those villains always monologuing.
even Quirrell does it a little bit.
He does do it a little bit. Yeah.
Because here's the thing, her books are all mysteries.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
they
you
are.
have to explain the mystery.
Yeah, you have to. You have to have Tim
so-
Curry at the end explaining what happened in the
exactly.
30 seconds in the dark.
Exactly. Like I said, I feel like I've nailed that analogy, but yeah, it is, and so I get it. And this is also, we'll get to it in the movie facts, but I'll put a pin in that for the movie facts about it being a mystery.
I have one more book fact, which is that The Goblet of Fire was the first and only Harry Potter book to win a Hugo Award. It also won the 2002 Indian Paintbrush Book Award and an Oppenheim Toy Portfolio Platinum Award, but the Hugo is the big deal.
Right? Yeah, that's a big one. And we've discussed several Hugo-winning novels, books before on this podcast. All right. Well, there are your book facts. Let's move right along and wrap this up with Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire movie fun facts.
Hogwarts has been chosen to host a legendary event, the Tri-Wizard Tournament. And now, the champion selection. Victor Crumb, Fleur Delacour, Cedric Diggory, Harry Potter!
How did you do it? I didn't put my name in that cup. I don't want eternal glory.
All right, so I have a handful of movie fun facts here. 2005 film, so 5 years after the movie release, or the book release.
Yeah.
Because this is when they started taking a little bit longer. Like we said earlier, they moved to an 18-month production cycle for between 2 and 3, and they might have gone even longer between the rest of them. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I didn't see that in any of the research I was doing, but I wouldn't be surprised if they moved to like a 2-year production cycle. It is the first book or movie in the series to be rated PG-13.
Growing on up.
Yeah, which makes sense because it's the first one where somebody dies. It was directed by Mike Newell. It's the only film in the series that he directed. They wanted Alfonso Cuarón to continue directing, but he decided he only wanted to do the one.
Oh, he had other things to do.
Well, it wasn't, from what I read, it was partially he just wanted to do the one, but also he was still, when they came to him to say, we want you to do 4, he was still doing post-production on 3 and was like, sort of like, no.
Like Harry Potter overload.
Yeah, like, I'm not even done with this movie. Like, get somebody else. So they got Mike Newell, who had been in talks to direct one of the films since the very beginning. He's a British director who had worked with children and done action, adventure, family type stuff. So he had been a popular choice among the producers, and so they finally worked him into one of them. I thought this was interesting because I've mentioned before that from my memory, this is the film that I found most objectionable while viewing it the first time when I saw it in theaters, and I may have only seen this movie once because I remember being like, I can't believe they changed that. I can't believe they changed that. I can't. That's not like it was in the book. Why would they change that? How dare they change that? I remember that being my experience and not liking the movie, and so I think I've only seen it once, maybe twice, but I saw it in theaters. I saw all of them in theaters when they came out, obviously.
Yeah.
But so Steve Kloves, the guy who wrote all of the movies and is still writing Harry Potter. He's been writing Harry Potter since the beginning. He's still writing Fantastic Beasts.
What a trooper.
On adapting the 734-page book into a feature-length film, he said, "We always thought it would be 2 movies. We could never figure out a way to break it into 2. So we're like, we're going to have to make it a different experience from the book."
Yeah.
Because they wanted it to be 2 movies, but they couldn't figure out how to make it 2 movies. And it just ultimately, the studio decided we're going to make it 1 movie. And so, which is the thing that's interesting. And at the time, 5 would have been out by now, I would think. Would have had to have been by 2005.
I think so.
Yeah, there's no way that the distance between book 4 and 5 was 6 years. It was like 2 or 3 years, probably. Yeah. So 5 would have been out by now. So they would also have had to know that if they make this 2 movies, how do you not make 5 2 movies?
Right, and then you have to make 6 2 movies.
And at that point, you're going to assume that none of the rest of the books are going to be any shorter than 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you go from a 7 movie series to a 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 movie series.
Oh, God.
And so they're like, okay, we're going to make these all one. So yeah, they ended up deciding to make it one, and that's why it's so different, because like we've discussed, cramming 734 pages into 2.5 hours.
You're gonna lose things.
It's impossible. It's
Yeah.
just impossible. Really interesting thing about the production, each task of the Triwizard Tournament required gigantic sets because they're obviously all huge set pieces. The rock quarry for the first task, the Dragon Challenge, where Harry faces off with the Hungarian Horntail, was built in 2 sections at studios, and it was one of the biggest sets they've ever built for any film, according to their production designer. The second task, involving the underwater scenes, they filmed in a giant underwater tank with a blue screen behind it so that they could CG in the background, basically. And it's I believe I read it was the second biggest, or it was among the biggest water tanks ever constructed for a film. The Abyss, the movie The Abyss, is like the largest ever. But this is up there in like the top 10, top 5 biggest water tanks ever constructed for a movie.
You know, it almost makes me wonder, because I feel like this is something that I would do if I had wildly successful books that were made into movies, and they were like gonna keep making my books into movies. I might just be like, let's see what they can do.
I don't think so. I think she told the story she wanted to tell.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
But also...
Yeah. Maybe. Daniel Radcliffe, obviously who plays Harry Potter, he, by himself, logged 41 hours and 38 minutes, specifically, underwater during the course of filming. All specifically just for that second task.
That's so many hours.
That is an insane amount of time underwater.
Ugh, I hate being underwater.
He was underwater so much that he ended up suffering 2 ear infections over the course of filming. And at one point during training, he inadvertently signaled that he was drowning. Accidentally gave the signal that he was drowning, which I can't remember what it is for diving. Hand on your head, I think, is I'm okay, or it might be I'm drowning. I don't know. I've seen it before. I don't remember. Like where you pat the top of your head. That's something in diving, but I can't
seems like a I'm okay.
Yeah, I think that's I'm okay. So then I don't remember
but I don't
what drowning
know.
is. But anyways,
so nobody take my word for that.
So anyways, he inadvertently signaled he was drowning, and there was a gigantic panic, and they all brought him up to the surface, but he was fine. And then for the final task, it obviously takes place in the giant the hedge maze. And the hedges, they built actual hedges from 20 to 40 feet tall, and then they enhanced it all with CGI, obviously, because the hedge maze does all kinds of nonsense in the movie, which we'll talk about when we get to it. I don't know how I feel about it. The hedge maze is where I had a lot of problems. This is a really interesting fact, because I wasn't aware of this, and apparently the director of this movie wasn't aware of it. Mike Newell was not aware that Alan Rickman wore black contact lenses for the role of Snape.
What?
Until one day he was talking to Alan Rickman and said, hey, really like your eyes are an amazing shade for this character. And Alan Rickman leaned over and pulled out his contact lens. I had no idea that he was wearing.
I didn't either.
I guess I did, because when I think about back to him in like Die Hard and stuff, his eyes are, I think, brownish, maybe, or green. But yeah, they're not black. They're not black. So the Yule Ball obviously is a big part. Not a big part. It's a big set piece of the book and of the movie. The big Christmas dance, or around Christmas. And all the kids in it, they had to train for like 3 weeks for the dance, because they do like a big, like a ballroom dance,
thing. Yeah.
But Daniel Radcliffe, I assume because he was so busy with the rest of being Harry Potter, that he only had time to train for several days. Yeah,
I think he's supposed to be bad at it anyway, isn't he?
And that's what it's because. So he didn't have as much time to train. He only had like 4 days to prepare for it. So they routinely only filmed him from the waist up and not show his feet. But I think he talked about in interviews after the fact, or at some point during production, is like, it would have been fine because Harry Potter famously is not a good dancer.
Yeah.
But, not famously, but it's a point in the book that Harry doesn't know how to dance, and so he's kind of clumsy. And they could have just rolled with it, but they were like, oh, we'll just film you from the waist up.
I would have rolled with it. I would have not given any of them training so they could all be bad dancers.
Yeah. And now this is where I'm a little bit disappointed because we discussed earlier that their original idea was to split the film into two, or the book into two films. Mm-hmm. And so supposedly it was the director himself, Mike Newell, who decided against the idea of adapting the book into two movies because he thought, I can cut enough of the book's bulky subplots to make it a workable film. Which is probably true. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see on rewatching if I feel that way. And apparently Alfonso Cuarón said, yeah, do that. Cut it, make it one movie.
So Alfonso Cuarón was like the devil on his shoulder.
He shares a little bit of the blame in this. A little bit of the blame. And I think it's a little rich for the guy who adapted the 300 or the 400-page book to tell the guy who adapted a 750-page book, yeah, do it in one movie. I did it in one movie. It was 300 pages shorter. It was half the length almost of my book. But yeah. This is the last film in the series that featured a lot of scenes filmed at Oxford, which a lot of the earlier films, the courtyard scenes and stuff like that, a lot of that kind of outdoor type of stuff was filmed at Oxford, and it informed a lot of the architecture of Hogwarts, including the Great Hall. So this is a fun little thing if you're rewatching the movies with us, and I want to look out for this because I'd never noticed this and I thought it was interesting. At around the hour and 45-minute mark, there's a scene with Dumbledore and Harry in his office, and they're at the Pensive. Mm-hmm. And if you pay close attention, there's a glass cabinet when Dumbledore approaches explaining what the Pensive is. And in the top left corner of that cabinet, you can apparently see a 3D model of the Deathly Hallows.
Interesting.
Which would be an interesting inclusion. Which, again, we didn't do the research here to see what books were out at this point.
Yeah.
Like if 6 was out at this point.
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was either. Which they're not. Is it mentioned even in 6? We don't learn about it until 7.
Deathly Hallows?
It would have been close. 6 might have been out at this point because, well, not when during production maybe. Because if this was filmed during 2000, it came out in 2005. If it was filmed early 2005 or late 2004, because book 7 came out in like 2007. I was in high school still.
Yeah.
When book 7 came out. Yeah. So that was like 2007. So 6 might have been out around 2005, 2004.
It might, maybe.
Yeah. So, well, at least, if nothing else, J.K. Rowling would have, by 2004, 2005, would have known where she was going.
Yeah.
And would have, could have gone to them and be like, Deathly Hallows, that's a thing I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's what happened because it's in the movie.
I mean, they think they start talking about some of the Hollows in book 6, but I don't think we ever, and I could be wrong. I don't think they ever actually say Deathly Hallows until 7.
No, and that's because we get the whole backstory and everything in 7.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't know. But yeah, so clearly J.K. Rowling came to them and was like, "This is the thing I'm doing," and they came up with the design for it, or she had the design, I guess. She probably came up with the symbol. I would imagine.
I mean, the gist that I get is that she always knew where exactly it was going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I knew she. Yeah, I've always heard that she knew. Ultimately, kind of like the rumor always was that she had written the last chapter. Like during the first book or something like that. Like she knew how the series was going to end. Now I don't know if she knew as specific down to like the Deathly Hallows, or if she just knew Harry confronts Voldemort. Voldemort kills Harry, but Harry, kills the part of him that's in Harry, and then Harry. You know what I mean? Like if she had like that kind of vague idea of what she wanted, sort of like that's or if she had like those specific elements nailed out or not. We'll get her. We'll get JK on for a chat, and we'll ask her. She must have done interviews like this, where she must have interviews out there where she just explained her, how much she knew when.
And I've mentioned probably in the prequel, The Sorcerer's Stone, it's a level of pre-planning that I cannot even begin to comprehend.
No, it's a kid's book that is on the level of. It's a little different, but I would say the pre-planning and the elements she plants early on the level of stuff like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, whereas those are more expansive worlds with like huge backstories.
Right.
That this doesn't necessarily have as much of. But this one has so many little elements throughout that you had to pre-plan. That is kind of crazy. That all ties in.
Right. And
in the same way.
I guess the thing that's insane to me is that like she pre-planned so much stuff, and then years down the line when she's actually writing the later books, it still works.
Yeah.
After all of the editing and everything, it all still works. Yeah. It blows my mind. I'm like, how even? I don't know. Anyway.
She's brilliant. That's how. Fucking brilliant. She deserves, of all the millionaires in the world, she deserves her money. All right, a couple more little quick things. Henry Cavill, Mr. Superman himself, auditioned for the role of Cedric Diggory.
That would have been interesting.
Ended up going to Robert Pattinson, who replaced, actually, because Cedric Diggory is in Prisoner of Azkaban, because in the first Quidditch game, they play against Hufflepuff, and Cedric Diggory is the Seeker, and in fact is the one who flies up and gets struck by lightning. So we actually see his face, because he's the Seeker when they're both flying straight up. And he was a stunt actor. He wasn't like a... So it was a stunt actor, and I can't remember his name, but they replaced the stunt actor with, an actual actor. And it was his first movie role, Robert Pattinson, who ultimately came on to be
Edward.
Edward, yeah.
Team Edward. Wow.
Yeah.
Oof, gosh.
So in the third task, the animated hedges were based on Stanley Kubrick's abandoned ideas for the hedge maze sequence in The Shining, which I thought was kind of interesting. Apparently, I guess he thought he had more ideas for the hedges to move and do kind of crazy stuff, which...
Oh, here's a me fact. I've never seen that.
Well, we'll have to do it.
Well, I know it. That's why I'm not watching it, because we're going to have to do it.
And then another fun fact on top of that, The Shining obviously was written by Stephen King, as most people are aware. And he's an avid fan of Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, because talent respects talent. Skill, respect, skill. This is the first movie that doesn't show the Dursleys, and I forgot about this. And no, I didn't. I did remember. I thought I remembered that they moved Harry's nightmare, not nightmare, but the scene where where he's dreaming, and when we see the whole thing at the
Riddle House.
The Riddle House, and then Harry wakes up and his scar hurts. I was like, I think that happens at the Burrow. In the movie, which it does, whereas in the book it happens.
I don't remember this at all.
I thought I remembered that, so they skipped the entire Dursley sequence, and then and it wasn't necessarily on purpose. They wanted to include that, but the Dursleys, the actors, thought they weren't getting paid enough, so they tried to negotiate for more money, and then they were like, "Well, we'll just cut you."
That is savage.
It is, but it's funny because I'm like, how could they have possibly had enough time to include anything at the Dursleys? We're already at 2.5 hours, and we already cut so much.
I know.
Having anything at the Dursleys seems like a nightmare. But that being said, there's some very specific elements that happen while he's at the Dursleys that I wished were in the movie. As I was rereading, I'm like, oh, I wish that was there. That's really good. We'll talk about. Three more. Rosamund Pike was first choice for the role of Rita Skeeter.
Amy.
Yeah, Amy herself. First role, but she turned it down. Lord knows why. But.
I mean, Rita Skeeter, though, Rosamund Pike would have been pretty young, right? Like, fairly young?
I would guess she'd been in
not a kid, but...
Early 30s? Late 20s, maybe? Early 30s?
Because I always imagined Rita Skeeter as, like, solidly middle-aged.
Yeah, in my head...
in her 40s.
See, I didn't necessarily. In my head, she was like mid-30s to early 40s. So I could have seen Rosamund Pike do it. I mean, because I think Emma Thompson at the time she played Trelawney wasn't as old as I kind of imagined Trelawney to be. Like, I always kind of imagined Trelawney as like early 50s. And I think Emma Thompson at the time was probably like at most early 40s.
Yeah.
If I had to guess. But all right, last two. So they used a digital spot removing technique, which had been used previously in television shows like Desperate Housewives, in post-production to clear up some of the more severe teen acne and skin problems because they tried makeup and it didn't look good on camera. So they did it digitally after the fact. They're like, yeah, acne is a little too bad, Hermione or whoever. And so they just did. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
I get it. But also, I could just leave it. They're supposed to be 14.
To be fair, I've just not too recently read about the boba tuber pus that they use to clear up acne.
Yeah.
So within canon in the books, they have a magic spell that gets rid of their acne. We got it too. It's called CGI. So there you go. And then finally, in the first draft of the script, the subplot, and this is a bit of a spoiler for, again, a couple things that we're going to touch on in the main episode, but I thought this was interesting. The subplot featuring the Weasley twins and Ludo Bagman was in the script originally. And they decided to cut it out.
I'm realizing as I read this book, like, there are things that I absolutely remember that, like, I can never re-experience the plot twist with who Professor Moody actually is.
Yeah, right.
But, like, there are other things, like, it's been so long since I've read this book that I'm like, I don't remember why Ludo Bagman is relevant at all. Like, I don't remember what his subplot is.
You don't?
At all.
I do.
I do not remember this.
That's awesome. But there are I've had lots of those moments where I'm like, oh, I forgot Winky was a character. Like, oh my gosh. And like an important character who, spoiler, isn't in the movie, but we'll get to it. But yeah, like there's lots of, because once we get to these bigger books where there's so much going on, it's just like, there's so many, you couldn't possibly remember, unless you're rereading them every year, you couldn't possibly remember every detail. Yeah, no. And it's, because I used to pride myself on knowing everything about
on all the Harry Potter trivia.
I had Harry Potter trivia board game, and I used to dominate at it because I prided myself on knowing everything about these books, it's just in the intervening 10, 12 years or whatever, I just haven't read them, and I'm really enjoying rereading them, and so if in our coming trivia night, if there's a Harry Potter section, we're going to clean up. Hopefully.
Well, as long as it's from the first couple books.
Yeah, the first 4 books at the time. Yeah. 5 books. Yeah.
I guess it has been about, because the last book came out my senior year of high school, I think.
2007.
Yeah. And
or 2006, one of the two.
I'm in my 10-year reunion year.
Yeah.
So...
No, it came out because I was in high school still, or maybe I was a freshman in college. One of the two. So it either came out in it came out between 2006 and 2008. So it's been 10 years, 10 to 12 years. 10 years, and I think I reread them all once after 7. Like after 7 came out and I read it, I think I reread them all again once in college, and then I haven't read them since then. I don't think so.
The later ones, I don't think I've read since they came out.
I know I reread all of the later ones at least once, but I think only once. So, like 6, 7. I know I reread 5 at least 2 or 3 times, but... So
this will be an adventure.
It will be, and I'm excited.
I will get to find out why Ludo Bagman is relevant.
It is a subplot that's not really important, but is interesting. I'll say that. Because I do remember what's going on there, but it's a bit of a red herring to some extent.
Okay.
So,
all right.
It is. It's a bit of a red herring to kind of get us go, what's going on? And then. So anyways, that is the prequel to the 30th episode, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. That episode will be out 1 week from today. Until then, you can find us on all of the social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, Reddit. We have a subreddit, is how you can find us, This Film Is Lit. Search This Film Is Lit on any of the other social media platforms. Katie posts lots of fun memes on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There are discussion threads on Reddit, which, again, it's pretty barren. Occasionally people post things, but wouldn't hate if eventually we got more people on there, if we have people who are on Reddit. And it's a good place. It's a good platform for discussion because you can comment and respond, and it doesn't go away, and it doesn't, doesn't get buried. It's easy to go into the comments for an episode and look at stuff. So check out our subreddit. And as always, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else, keep reading books, keep watching movies, and keep being awesome.